In any other year, the extraordinary organizing that we've seen around the issue of immigration reform would have been nothing short of game-changing. An astonishing coalition of faith, business, and political leaders have come together in support of finally resolving a long-standing impasse affecting millions of families in this country. Just this past week, American Muslims and American Jews came together calling on Congress to take action on immigration reform. But this isn't any other year. With the government shutdown, brinksmanship over health care, and other man-made disasters at the foundational level, addressing this or any other issue in a responsible way, no matter how big, has seemed to be out of the question on Capitol Hill. Despite that fact, there's been little let-up in efforts to spur action in the House of Representatives on immigration reform, thanks in great part to the actual success of the Senate in passing a bill on the issue. And in the finest tradition of intensely personal sacrifice in the cause of social justice, religious and political leaders staged a protest several weeks ago that led to a number of arrests. Now, committed immigration activists are going even one step further, launching a public hunger strike for immigration reform called the Fast for Families. It's taking place on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and joining me now is one participating in that Fast for Families, a longtime leader in Washington, Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, who is co-chair of the National African American Clergy Network. Barbara, thanks so much for being with us today on State of Belief Radio.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I know this is much more than just a symbolic act, but why a fast and why now?
We're fasting in the tradition of the Hebrew prophets and of champions for justice like Mahatma Gandhi, like Martin Luther King Jr., and like Cesar Chavez, who, when the government reached a point where it failed to hear the cries of families that are separated, snatched in the midnight and deported, separated from one another, the only response is this kind of act of civil disobedience, which is a fast. And the fast is not a desperate act. Fast is an act of hope. It's an act that says that just as Jesus sacrificed for us and fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and certainly as Hebrew prophets and others fasted, that we can make the sacrifice for some days here. Some of us are fasting until our bodies will no longer allow it, and others are fasting for a week. We have 2,000 nuns fasting on the 20th around the country. We have people joining us every day because they just believe that we're a better country than this. That we're committed to family values, and yet what is the worst act against family values than disconnecting families, snatching one from another?
Dr. William Skinner, how did you personally become involved in immigration activism?
Well, I am, as the chair, co-chair of the National African American Clergy Network. We have worked very closely with Latino clergy, with clergy from other faith traditions, and immigration is an issue that is not a south of the border issue only. It affects Haitian Americans and Caribbean Americans and Americans from an Irish background and others. So it's really it's a human issue. It's a human rights issue, and I tend to get involved in these issues. I have the pleasure of knowing Coretta Scott King and working closely with people like that, and worked for a member of Congress who knew and worked with Ron Dellums, worked with Cesar Chavez. So this is a very personal thing to me. And as a follower of Jesus Christ, who was an immigrant as a child, leaving this country, leaving his own country, going to Egypt and coming back, I don't think we can do any less. And the question is, why not do it now? Right. The country is committed to it. The majority of Americans are for comprehensive immigration reform. The only reason that it's not happening is that there is a certain level of fear about what the country might become, because the country by 2050 will be a majority people of color. But we have, the country is big enough for all of us. It's big enough for all Americans, and so I think the fast is a way of saying the time is right now, and we can't wait. We were just visited by Secretary of Agriculture Bill Sack. We had Congressman Luis Gutierrez. We had other members of Congress, Chuck Schumer and others coming. And so members of Congress are ready to act. And so I think we're just giving them the courage to move to the next level. They see our sacrifice, and they're ready to move.
Some of our listeners here in their hometowns, people say, this is an immigration issue. The church ought to stay out of it. This has nothing to do with religion. Would you talk, and I'm going to say briefly because I think you could probably talk all day about this question, talk briefly about the morality of this issue.
The issue is that there are over 2,000 verses of Scripture in the Holy Bible, and God's concern for justice and God's preferential concern, I should say, for the poor. Now, if that is not, and for aliens and for strangers, that Jesus in his own words has said that, do not forsake the aliens and the strangers, for you too were aliens at one point. So I don't know that we need another case other than the Holy Bible for coming alongside those who are immigrants, immigrant families. Yeah, I do believe in protecting the borders. So we're not talking about opening the borders and not having any security. But the issue is comprehensive immigration reform. It just allows, there are 11 million Americans who are living in the shadows. Many of them are being abused because you can't turn in an employer who's abusing you because that employer has that over your head. We are a much better country than that, and I want to stand on the side of justice every ounce of energy that I have. So this path is a small sacrifice for me.
We just heard all of this week the Speaker of the House saying that this isn't going to be considered. So what would it take to have you break the fast at this point?
Well, people have said they're not going to do something until they do it. So, I've been in Washington a long time. I've listened to what people aren't going to do until they do it. So we're going to be visiting members of Congress, including Speaker Boehner, and we just really believe that God is on the side of justice.
Yeah.
And so we are standing on a very, very strong, solid moral tradition as when we fast.
How can the listeners to this radio show support this effort?
Well, even if they fasted a meal and reported that they were fasting a meal, I mean, look, some of us can stand to fast 2 meals. But if we just fasted a meal, it doesn't have to be, it can be a juice fast. It can be a fruit fast. If you look in the Bible, there's a Daniel fast, which is vegetables. There are all kinds of fasts, and there's a water fast. If those of you who have medical issues should not fast without checking with your doctors. But you can fast once a week. You could fast a meal once a week. I think they could stand in solidarity with us that way. That would be very powerful, and it would be very encouraging to us.
Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner has a long history of ministry and leadership in Washington, D.C. and nationally. She's the co-chair of the National African American Clergy Network, as well as president and co-founder of the Skinner Leadership Institute. The goal of this Fast for Families on the National Mall is to spur congressional action to end the current stalemate on immigration reform. Barbara, by all means, I respect you being in the fast. I don't want you to lose that strong voice. We need what you're saying. We need people all over this nation to hear it. And so I'm thankful for you.
What we need, if we could get, particularly your white listeners, if white listeners would understand, they could reach out to members of Congress, those who are Republicans and who are morally centered, could reach out to members of Congress. They need to hear from people like themselves that this is the right thing to do.
Yes.
And if people want to check in with us on our website, it's FAST and the number 4families.org, FAST for Families. And our hashtag, our Twitter hashtag is @FAST, the number 4families.
Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, thank you for being with us today on State of Belief Radio, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for having me.